AI inference startup Baseten has raised $1.5 billion across two tranches, one at an $11 billion valuation, the other at $13 billion. Baseten specializes in delivering software and computing capacity to companies tapping open source, typically lower cost AI models. The firm's co-founder and CEO, Tuhin Srivastava, joins along with one of its investors, Altimeter capital partner, Apoorv Agrawal, whose firm co-led the round. And actually, it was really interesting, the list of participants that backed you. Let's start with the basic questions that the audience always has, which is, wow, $1.5 billion round, it's a lot of funds. But the stories seem to not change, right? Compute is a constraint, talent is a competitive marketplace. I'm assuming that's where those proceeds go.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, with inference right now, what we are seeing is there's a lot of demand for inserting intelligence everywhere we possibly can. There's open source models are getting very good.
Right.
And post-training techniques to specialize those models for specific tasks are getting very good. And as the app layer comes online, there's an enormous surge of demand. For us, what that means is, look, we need to go procure a lot of compute to be able to fulfill that demand, and also hire amazing infrastructure engineers and research engineers to be able to build the software layer on top of that.
Tuhin, just real quick, what's that like trying to acquire the compute? Like, do you have any leverage in that market? If everyone is supply constrained,
yeah.
How is the experience of being a company of Baseten's age and size going to NVIDIA, as an example, saying we kind of need this?
Yeah, look, we have a very strong relationship with NVIDIA, and they've been very supportive of us over the years. Look, one thing that we have realized is that you cannot be reliant on one compute source. You have to, work. You have to diversify, not necessarily from a chip perspective, from a cloud perspective. So, we acquire compute from 18 different clouds now. We sit in around 90 different clusters, and that's the flexibility we need to be able to acquire compute and fulfill the demand.
I posted on X that you were both coming on the show, and Apoorv, I kind of put this question out there, that if you could only invest in one part of the five-layer cake, as Jensen calls it, what would it be? But Altimeter's been so busy, with the frontier labs at one end, and other parts of the five-layer cake at the other end. What was the thesis around Baseten and why you wanted to get in here to co-lead the round?
Ed, it's good to be here. Some truths cannot be said enough times. And one of those is that inference is going to be one of the largest, if not the largest markets, not in AI, in the world. And why is that the case? The early innings of AI were Q&A. Tell me about my trip. We've come a long way since then. It's multi-agent. They've gotten longer context. You go retrieve, analyze, synthesize, verify, and then you go again. And each request is kicking off hundreds, if not thousands, of inference requests. The second thing is, I might correct something you said, Ed. It's not just cost. It's capability, control, and cost. Frontier models, the post-trained open source models comes very close to frontier model performance, sometimes even better for specific workflows. Control, as Satya Nadella said last weekend, you've got to compound your unique advantages as an enterprise, your data, your knowledge, your know-how, in a way that you're not giving away your intelligence on rent. And that's what Baseten allows. And so to your question from this morning is like, where does value accrue? Is it at the app layer? Is it at the model layer? The way I like to frame it is, look, the model layer is a phenomenal business for very few people. It's a game of emperors. You've got to be at the frontier to accrue a lot of value, and it's a knife fight, as you know. I've started joking there's 4 seasons to the year. It's Anthropic, OpenAI, SpaceX, Google, with an evergreen of open source.
Yep.
And so that's
that part's so fascinating, right? If we could just go to open source, when this story started, for us, let's say 2022, but for you guys probably before that, it was this idea that it was only the model, the largest models with the hundreds of billions of parameters that mattered. And in the world of open source, the issue was that that just didn't work. People couldn't make any real use of them. I go back to what Apoorv just said. You are making utility out of open source models, but probably also at a slightly smaller scale of model. Is that fair? Yes.
Look, I think if you look at, when you think about open source, it's kind of gone through a bit of a journey.
Right.
There's Llama 3, maybe two and a half years ago, and then there was a bit of a winter. And then I think the DeepSeek moment last year really put it back on the map, and there was definitely the capability gap shrunk. I think this is happening again just over the last couple of weeks with GLM 5.2, which is, I'd say, a frontier-level model that is actually usable, and it isn't just doing well in the benchmarks. When people are using it, they are feeling that, at the frontier capability. For us, it's just like, how do we make these models very, very easy to use? And it doesn't really matter what size they are. Like, we work with small models, big models, massive models. What we are trying to give our customers the ability to run these models when they don't necessarily have access to the infrastructure teams of the frontier labs doing it for them.
So let's go back to what you were talking about, Apoorv. Cost, but also utility and capability.
Yeah.
The other case study in this open source debate was Meta kind of changing its narrative, saying, well, actually, we are committed to open source, but at some point we need to be realistic about the benefit of closed models. What is the point on the capability part?
Yeah.
And actually, take a moment, explain what Baseten does, why it is such an important player in that respect.
Sure. Look, it's yesterday it was DeepSeek. Today it's GLM. It'll be something tomorrow. And as I said, it's seasonal. And that battle at the model layer is not, we're nowhere near the end game. What Baseten does is it helps customers like Cursor, like a bridge, like Open Evidence, harness the power of the model underneath, combine that with your unique advantage as an enterprise, your workflow, and deliver something that is best for that specific workflow. Now, it's not just one model. It's typically a collection, a portfolio of models that are fine-tuned to deliver that, and that compounds over time. And so Baseten is successful as these models get better. It benefits us. And ultimately in the service of the app layer, which is the customers that we discussed, who are delivering AI to the customer.
Jensen's been repeating a lot recently, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. Sometimes you have to remind the audience, just in case. He wants to see his teams burning tokens. How does that apply to your customers, right? So Apoorv's just explained really clearly the value that you're adding, but the economics are really, really important to some of these companies.
Yeah, look, I think using tokens is obviously just synonymous with, hey, I want us to be using AI everywhere.
Yeah, it's in their interest for that to be the story right now.
And I think for us, what we see is like customers kind of go through the same curve over and over again, is that they go very aggressively, they start using AI everywhere, they start to see gains, but they don't necessarily do it profitably, and then they need to figure out how to do it profitably. And that's when they come to open source models, that's when they come to Baseten, that's when they come to post-trained models on Baseten to be able to do it better, faster, and cheaper. And that's when you decide to get both intelligence everywhere, but also unit economics that make sense for your business.
What I've been trying to reconcile is Altimeter is invested in the big frontier labs as well. And those big frontier labs plus SpaceX, depending on how you define what they are, would also say that they have a role to play in that market. Where are we in this cycle of were there just in the end be very big players? Where does Baseten fit in that?
Look, a lot of ink has been spilled on this debate of open versus closed. Let me just take that head on. The closed models, the frontier models, are very, very good, and they're very good for the use case that require highest intelligence, highest reasoning, new use case discovery. If you didn't want to think about just one model as a service, they're very good, and they will always be very good for that. For a class of customers, that's not a long list. As Jonathan Ross said, there's about 35 companies that drive 99% of all inference. The top 5 are the labs that you just listed, top 4, top 5. The next 30, that's people like Cursor, like Open Evidence, like a bridge, like Harvey. And for them, if you're not playing the game of the emperors and you're thinking about how do I deliver something that is not rented from somebody else, but mine that I can compound with, that's where post-trained open source can help. And so we posted this chart this morning about how Harvey, for example, achieved frontier capabilities post-training an open source model, but obviously with a much better cost and control frontier, as an example of what the next 30 are thinking about, and then the next 1,000 are thinking about.